folks, so welcome to my first YouTube tutorial on how to do sunsets, and this one is particularly going to be based on how to edit a sunset. And after this, if I get any comments and likes, and I hope you do like this, I will probably be doing a start to finish tutorial on how to take a sunset with a camera or go onto a location and then coming back to the office or studio to process it. So this particular photograph here is of Thursley Common in Surrey. It's a beautiful spot, but sadly, just over a week ago, there was a huge fire here. So, well, it's a bit devastating to say the least. It's a beautiful area. I come with my family and we walk the dog, and of course for some photography as well. So Thursley Common, it's still a beautiful place, but a lot of it has burnt down. The boardwalks there, and yeah, accessibility to where this photograph was taken is now probably limited. Anyway, first thing to do is to talk about the photograph itself and how I took it. So I'm just going to bring up on here, I'm going to bring up the details. I shot this at 1/320th of a second at f/22 and ISO 200, and I'll quickly explain why I took it at those settings. The speed really was, I shot this in aperture priority, so the speed was set by the aperture that I set. So really don't worry about that at the moment. But I was hand holding actually, so no tripod on this particular one. But the f/22, the reason I did f/22 is that when you have a small aperture like that, actually it's small in the size, is that you get this lovely sunburst effect. You get the kind of streaks coming out from the sun, and I wanted to create that. So you need to kind of go up to the f/18, f/22 to get this effect here. If you're shooting at, say, f/8, you're going to lose this starburst effect. And it doesn't matter. It's not going to make any difference to the overall shot. But also, with that aperture, you're also going to get a very wide depth of field, which means, you know, the foreground here will be in focus, and of course the middle ground and the distance, say, up into the clouds here as well. So f/22 gives you this starburst and this incredible depth of field. The other thing to note is I set the ISO to 200 ISO, and I like to shoot my sunsets at the lowest ISO as I possibly can, so that you don't get any noise creeping in, especially in the darker areas here. And the fact that you're shooting your camera straight into the sun means you're getting a lot of light coming through, and that means you're not going to need to be using those higher ISOs and inducing some noise within this area here. The other thing, which it doesn't tell you on here, but I always shoot with now, is spot meter. And I use back button focus, which means I'm separating my focus on the back of the camera to the shutter button, which is just purely doing the exposure. And the reason I do that is that I like to focus first on the clouds or the distant trees here with back button focus. So then once I've done that, I let go of the button, and then that's locked. And then the spot metering, I'm taking care of what I call the brightest, hottest area of the image. So by bringing my spot meter not quite into the middle of the sun here, but just off to the side here, I'm capturing that amount of light, and that's the light. I do not want this area to overexpose by any means. I want to capture all these lights and details within here. It's quite common that you see a lot of sunsets burn out because people are exposing more for the darker areas around here, which means you're going to get an exposure burnout around the bright, or I call it the hot spot. So by using spot meter, and where you can see where I'm moving my cursor, I kind of bring the spot meter onto this area here, not right into the sun here, but just on this area to the left or the right, or in this case be left and the right. And then that's going to make sure that we get a really good exposure here. We're not going to burn out or blow out any of those highlights. So if I come down here, this is actually how the photograph looked. So this is the photograph, how I took it. You can see, because I used that spot meter, that the highlights in here are not overexposed. And if I turn on my exposure and my shadows on here, my darks. In fact, I'll leave the darks off for a minute. Obviously, I said I didn't expose right into the middle of the sun there, so we've got a little bit of an overexposure here, but I'm not bothered by that. That's not a problem. Where I'd be concerned is if this area here was showing the red burnout in here. So that I'm not bothered about. So let's start the process of of exposing and getting this sunset, how my eye saw it. So you can notice I have underexposed it. Because of this area here, using the spot meter, I have underexposed this area. And I do that for a reason, because you can always bring that information back. When you lose an area in here and you overexpose an area, when you're shooting in RAW, which is what we're doing here, it's very, very difficult to bring that. In fact, it's pretty much impossible, because you've lost that information. But I know within these dark areas here, all the way around here, I've got that information. It's stored in the RAW file, and I'm going to be able to pull that back into here. So the first thing I do is I get my shadow slider and I bring the shadow slider up, and there you go. You can start to see those details coming back. I then slide, this is kind of doing HDR, by the way. I'm sliding my highlight slider down, and what we're beginning to see now are the bursts coming out from that f22 setting, which you can see around here. Now I need to pull the exposure up, and there we go. Can you see the image now starting to sprinkle and come to life? And at no time am I getting that overexposure clipping in here. And that's the bit that I really, really didn't want to lose when I took my photograph. So I'm just bringing up the exposure until those lights and darks start to sparkle. Now, the thing with photography is that obviously when you're at a scene, you know it, you've seen it, you've been there, and you should take a photographic picture in your mind of how that image looked. Oops, sorry, I don't know how it came up. You need to take a photographic memory of how that image looks. So when you come back to the studio, you can sit in front of your computer and recreate that scene, and maybe add a little extra sparkle to it as well. Now, the only thing I sometimes do is just drop those shadows down a little bit more. I don't want them to be too bright. I'm just going to increase that, and that's probably where I'm going to stick for now. Now, the next thing I do, and I think it's really important, is just to add a little bit of white back into the image. Now, what you can see is my sun is now starting to overexpose. I'm getting that red warning. Now, I'm not too bothered by that. I'm going to deal with that a little bit later. But what it's doing is just putting in a little bit of white into these areas here, and just kind of adding a little bit of sparkle. The next thing we do, I don't really touch contrast too much. Certainly on a shot like this, I like to go into the dehaze, and this kind of removes that blue hue and distance, but what it does do, it creates that lovely effect of contrast. So you can you see that just coming in there? Everything will go slightly darker. Then a little sprinkle of vibrance, that just adds a little bit of extra color back in. And the other thing I do is just increase a little bit of the temperature. So I would probably bring it to here, because that just warms up the sky. And this is a summer evening, and I remember there was a lot of orange, coming around here. The warmth was coming through. So I actually leave, on my camera settings, I do leave my color balance as an auto. And the reason I do that, and it doesn't make any difference really, because when you come back into processing here in Lightroom, you can move it to where you remember that sunset. So there we go, we're getting back into where it roughly was, and it's warming up these areas around here. Now, that's pretty much, it's a very quick edit really. By using that exposure that I was telling you about and not burning this out, you've got all the detail and information in there. The only thing I will do, and this is just my camera, the Z6, it does suffer with a little bit of banding. You get a little bit, you can't really see it. If I zoom in, here you get just a little bit of noise. It's not noise from the sensor I was talking about, because I was shooting at 200 ISO. You just get a little bit of banding. It's a mirrorless camera, and I think it's just one of the flaws that it has. So what I tend to do is I just go in and put in about I don't know, 15, 20, maybe just drop that to about 25% of noise reduction, and that'll just take care of a little bit of that banding, or not ISO noise, but just a bit of a noise that comes in from my Z6 camera. Now we've whipped past this whole area here, which is the color area here, which is luminance. So that means you can make the oranges brighter, or you can make it darker, and you can see the effects there. You know, it looks fake. So I don't really do too much there. Maybe just a couple of clicks to make it brighter. And on the saturation, we've already put in some vibrance. So we don't want to really overdo this. We don't want to make the image look unrealistic. So we can just increase a little bit of the orange, just a tiny bit, to add a little bit more into here. And the only other thing I might do just on that luminance is on the green on the left hand side here, is just increase a little bit. If I just pull it up, you'll see, yeah, you can see it changing there. Again, I don't want it to make it look unrealistic, because I'm trying to recreate the scene that I saw with my eye at that time of the evening when the sun was setting. So that's it. Let me just have a little look around. I might just click the exposure up a tiny bit more, and the white, which just adds that little sparkle back in. There you can see. If I drop it down, you can see what I mean. It's like a brightness. It just adds the sparkle of the colours back in. Right, now going back to this area here, where you can see I've got the burnt out areas, what we can do is use this tool here. This is the brush tool. And what I tend to do is set the brush here to about the size, just a little bit bigger than the area that's burnt out. You can hopefully see that. And by resetting all the sliders on here, you just press Effect, double click it, and that resets everything back to normal. I drop the highlights down to about 30, and I take the brush and I just dab over there and over here, and you can just see that the highlights slowly disappearing. I'm just going to move it down a little bit more until that red has nearly disappeared. If I do it too much, it's going to affect underneath the sun there. So it's about there. So there's a tiny, tiny little bit of overexposure that I'm really not bothered by. If I turn off the clipping tool there, you'll see that actually that is fine. There's no problem with that at all. It is, after all, the sun. It is the natural hotspot of the image. So I'm just going to actually bring that up a tiny bit. Actually, yeah, just about F. I'm going to bring up to about 20. Right, that's that done. Now, the other thing which is important when you're shooting on f/22 like this to get these effects is you're going to very much get into the trouble of having some dust marks within your picture. So we go up onto this thing here, which is the spot removal tool. And if we go down here and press visualize spots, it's going to show us where the noise is, or the dots, or the dust that is on our sensor. So I can see there are a few little ones around here. I'm not too bothered in this area, you know, where all the detail is, because you're not going to see it, but you will see it up in the smooth parts of the sky. So just creating a brush size big enough to do a spot, I just click on these and to remove those dust spots, which will be very visible when you're shooting, as I said, f/18, f/22, somewhere around there. That very large depth of field. So just cruising around here, removing those. A couple here, one here, and one here. And I think that's probably all we're going to need. So if I remove the visual spots down there, there you go. You can see where these were. And if I press done, there we go. We will remove ourselves from that tool. I think that's pretty much it. Just having a little look around if there's anything else I can do. One of the things I can suggest is when you're doing kind of a lot of photo editing, you know, you've got a roll here of lots and lots of images that you want to edit. And we whiz through them, you know, we come back, we're really excited. And that's the thing about photography. You go out onto the field, you take your photographs, and you shoot back to the studio, and you want to get editing straight away, and you edit maybe 20, 30 pictures from that session that you've done. What I have noticed is that actually, before you finalize that image, before you say, yeah, I'm done, finished, maybe put it away for the night, come back the next day with fresh eyes. And this is very much a thing that you do in art, and that's my kind of, you know, that's what I do all the time. That's my actual job actually as an artist. I'll often put a painting away and look at it a day or 2 or 3 days later, when you think you've finished it, and you come back with fresh eyes, and you'll see things that maybe you didn't see the first time. And it's the same with photography. I've noticed it with editing. Don't be too eager just to say, right, yeah, I've done it, bang, post it. I often come back to an edit like this, and I'll say, you know what, why didn't I lighten this part of the sky, or why didn't I lighten this part? And it's just gives yourself a little bit of breathing space. So talking about lightening, if we go to the filters here, if I wanted to lighten up this little bit at the bottom here, I can drag this filter up. Again, double clicking the effects will reset all the sliders. I can now brighten or darken this area up here, or increase, maybe put a little bit of blue into that area, or a tiny bit of dehaze, and maybe again I would just add a sprinkle of white. Done. Now I can take this filter and drag it down here, double click, the effect will reset the sliders, and I can pull up the exposure a tiny bit just to brighten that area, and I might just drop a tiny bit of the cooler temperature in there, just so you've got that lovely cool to hot effect from here to here. There we go, guys. I think I'm done. That's pretty much how I saw the sunset. That's what it looked like on the evening, and I'm satisfied that I've created or brought back from that shot do you remember that very overexposed or underexposed, beg your pardon, shot, which looks something like this, to get all that detail in, and I've managed to bring it up to how I saw it on the evening, which was like that. Guys, I really hope that has been helpful, and it's given you some information on how to edit a lovely sunset like this. I will be doing a full session from the camera on location to editing back in the studio soon, so please don't forget to subscribe and click the bell, and you'll get a notification when that happens. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed making it, and we'll see you soon. Take care for now. Bye-bye.